Halloween, everyone. Welcome to another live, this time talking about some of the spooky behavior that can come out of your exes who are avoidantly attached, specifically ghosting and haunting. I'm also going to use this as an opportunity to do a bit of Q&A at the end of my little TED Talk, and we can get into it. So if you've got any questions for me regarding all the kinds of wacky behavior that avoidant attachers are capable of, feel free to just ask them of me and I'll get round to them in due course. So let's dive straight in. I think that one thing to understand with dating in general is that there is always going to be a degree of ghosting that happens for one reason or another, and ghosting in and of itself is something that happens for a variety of reasons. It doesn't automatically mean that someone's got an avoidant attachment if they ghost you. You know, people can ghost you because, say, well, one example that's quite extreme is if, for example, they're in an abusive relationship and they just have to leave because they can see that communication's utterly failed and they need to get out for their own health and well-being. So that can be one instance of where ghosting can occur. A not example of ghosting would be if you just met someone on, a handful of, say first date sort of thing, and you don't hear from them again, or you've just been texting them, and it wasn't of a date that you were particularly mad about. You were that was kind of meh, and I wasn't really into it. I mean, that's not really the basis for the kind of ghosting that I'm going to be talking about. No, the ghosting that I think most of us are familiar with from avoidant attachers would be more characterized by when you have spent at least significant enough emotional investment with someone. Let's say you've been dating a person for a while, spending lots of time, hearing great compliments and feedback from this person. They're telling you how you're the person who's made them feel the best that they've ever felt. They've never had a partner quite like you before, and they worry that they're not going to be able to be, good enough for you. And then all of a sudden, after you've declared that you want to be in a committed relationship, you never hear from this person again. Or you've been dating for quite some time and this person all of a sudden pulls back and you don't hear from them again for about a month, 6 months to a year, and they just decide to just come into your life whenever they feel like it because they want to take space from you, right? And then you might even have spent a really good first date with someone where it did feel like things were going in the right direction and things felt really, really good, only for this person to just not want to talk to you ever again. And then they might circle back around at one point being like, "Oh, sorry, yeah, work was really busy. I was in a really dark place, but I'm still into seeing you at some point." So, or I've got another example here that someone's shared. "My fearful avoidant ex left and ghosted me 12 weeks ago, still hasn't officially ended our relationship." Wonderful. This is the kind of ghosting we're talking about. And this is the infamous kind of ghosting. The ghosting which really robs people of any voice in a relationship, situationship. It's not really providing any sense of closure. It really takes people completely out of it and leaves them feeling really traumatized. And the worst thing too is that it leaves you with so many questions that you will likely get unanswered from this person. It puts you into a nasty trauma bond where the avoidant, in this case, who's pretty severe in their avoidant attachment, is running the show, calling the shots, and you're in this really bad situation where you can't really get any answers for what you're after. And there are variations of this kind of stuff. Your avoidant partner might block you, they might get into a new relationship, they might start using psychobabble, meaning they'll use psychotherapeutic terms like, "I'm protecting my boundaries. Why can't you understand that you're violating my boundaries by reaching back out to me to find out what's going on? You don't need answers to move on. You should just be able to get over it and move forward with your life just like I have. I don't owe you anything," right? That can be an example where they use psychotherapeutic terms to justify their abusive behavior. And their use of the word boundaries is not the correct use of the word. What they're really trying to say is, can't you just respect my control and how I want to be treated? And it's conditional. It's very controlling behavior, and it completely deprives you of your right to actually know what's going on. I want to make a little point here to say, and this comes from a book that I've been reading called Avoidant Abuse, which is amazing, and I'm going to recommend it properly and do a live on it eventually. The author goes on to talk about how in this day and age, we all have a right to privacy. We all have a right to boundaries. We have a right not to disclose things within reason, of course, right? However, in a romantic relationship, one of the key abusive strategies that a lot of severe avoidants employ is a technique called withholding. They withhold critical information to the relationship. They undercommunicate how they show up, their limitations, and so they misrepresent themselves and also don't tell you how they're thinking and feeling much of the time. So what this does for a lot of people like yourself is that it actually leaves you with so little oxygen off the back of this, where you're desperately looking to find out what actually happened, and you'll ask questions like, did they just not like me anymore? Have I done something wrong? Etc. When neither of those questions are actually correct in any of that. And it's really just a case of them, one, obviously freaking out due to their fear of intimacy, but then two, doing the disrespectful thing of actually not explaining why they have this fear of intimacy in the first place. Now, the book, Avoidant Abuse, the author goes on to talk about some of the reasons as to why these individuals might actually resort to ghosting rather than actually having a proper conversation to let you know what's going on. We know that a lot of avoidant attachers will conclude their business with a rationalization like, I can't give you what you're looking for. They might, give you a rationalization like, you like mountain hiking, I like mountain climbing, clearly we're not compatible, right? Those usual bullshitty rationalizations. However, there is a special kind of avoidant attacher who takes it one step further by just not even telling you why they're breaking up with you and proceeds to ghost or even block you. And this is someone where the author suggests avoidance can do this even if they don't just ghost you. Some of these really severe avoidant attachers, the author believes, have degrees of paranoia. What I mean by that is they have this twisted belief that you are needy, you are helpless without them, that if you were to have a conversation around the breakup, that you would try and convince them to stay, and that would take away their agency and control from this situation because they don't believe that they could actually stand up and, assert their boundaries for not wanting this. So in a very insecure way, they deprive you of any voice in this because they believe that you'll try and manipulate them into staying and they don't want to deal with the disappointment. And this book even goes further on to say that because a lot of these individuals are people pleasers, they care a lot about their reputation, they will not only deprive you of the conversation because they don't want to look like a bad person. Worse, they may start, similar to a narcissist, a smear campaign amongst their friends and family saying how you're needy, you just want to get back with them, that you're crazy, you're a stalker. So that way they can justify in their head the narrative that you're obsessed with them. So what this can contribute to is the cycle of haunting. And haunting is when they watch you on social media even after they've taken great effort to get rid of you, and you see them lurking on your stories, etc. And the thing that you have to understand is that they are spending quite a bit of time doing one of two things. They're trying to, on one hand, convince themselves that they're over you, that they're moving forward. We're not here to think about the past. You just got to get on with life and move forward, not feel anything negative, right? And they'll also try and convince their friends and their family that you're just too obsessed with them and that you're trying to get back with them and that you're needy, etc. And so they really try and drum up this idea that somehow you are just helpless without them. And this feeds into one of the biggest issues for a lot of avoidant attachers who are on the severe end is many avoidant attachers, because they are actually very needy people, even if they would forbid themselves from ever explaining this, they want to feel needed. They have to feel important in a person's life, which is why many of them are great acts of service people. They know how to show up and do things for others because they like that validation of feeling like they're important, they're worthy, makes them feel big, tough, and strong. And as a consequence, what happens is that when they are in this haunting cycle, they actually kind of get off on the idea that you might still be into them. And that's a bit of a half-truth. We know that many of you will probably still be wanting to try and at least figure out what went wrong and to see if you could fix things. But in their delusional headspace, when they're going through this episode of paranoia and they're not thinking in reality, they think that you're just like manically obsessed with them, and they like that feeling, which is why they often, like the really bad avoidant attachers who have their harem of exes, will have, you know, so many of these really deeply codependent people in the backdrop who are still, you know, hankering and desiring to be with this person. So it really feeds into this toxic cycle of shame where they feel like shit, so they need to have all these people giving them validation and also a sense of purpose. Now, the second aspect of the haunting is that whilst they try and convince themselves that you're the needy, helpless human being that you are and that you're really, you know, just unable to function without them, here's the deep irony. They still really fucking love you. Like, they still really care about you, and they still also really like you, and they haven't dealt with those feelings. So the haunting aspect not only has elements of paranoia, delusion, and fiction to try and convince themselves that they're not the problem, it also hides a lot of their own stuff that's actually going on beneath the surface, which is the fact that they actually feel quite close to you. But here's the rub. Haunting also serves as another part of a defensive mechanism for a lot of avoidance as well too, which, as a lot of you will know, is part of their fear of intimacy. So we know that avoidant attachers, when they break up with you, it's also designed to help them feel relief and also to create that space between the two of you physically and emotionally, so that way they can start to control the dynamic between the two of you. That means that what they have achieved is a feeling of safety where everything now is on their terms. They control the dialogue. They control, you know, when they reach out to you. If you reach out to them, they may reply to you very shortly. They may give you a little bit of breadcrumbing here and there. They may be the ones to reach out with memes. They're notoriously likely to try and still, you know, act and speak as if you're in a romantic relationship with them. And even if they've said, no, we're friends, because they want to dictate and control the title of the relationship. They want to dictate the flow and what this relationship is called. So they're very particular about that. And this period of haunting where they have that distance between the two of you is really designed to try and help them feel like they have emotional distance from you and safety, so they don't get triggered by closeness and vulnerability. But it also means they don't achieve closure for themselves either. It's a lose-lose situation in the long run, because what it ultimately does is it leaves you hooked in a trauma bond where you're feeling completely helpless because you're not given proper information as to what's going on, and you get no answers for what's going on unless you come to me or read books about it, or find other great influences out there like Dr. Sarah Hensley. Or, you know, and for the avoidant attacher who's creating this dynamic, you know, they're not really winning either, because they're not being honest with themselves. They want a relationship, they want connection, but their self-sabotage and their need to be needed, their need for validation gets in the way of that. And this is where the severe category of avoidance can actually be quite nasty. I've seen some people who have asserted their boundaries and be like, I'm not going to be your friend. I do not deserve to be treated like this. Fuck you. this was, supposed to be a good relationship or situationship and you've ruined it. And the avoidant has lost it. Some avoidants, particularly those that are fearful avoidants who are quite on the severe end, do not like feeling as though you've regained control over this dynamic. Some of them can be very, very mad when you take that agency back and you're like, I'm not putting up with this, because then their fear of abandonment perks up and they feel like you're leaving them. They then have to feel shame, which they're trying to get away from. And I want to make a quick moment here to say, not every avoidant attacher will do this kind of wacky behavior. Those that are on the severe end often have real toxic shame. They internalize, I am a bad person, I am unworthy. And what this book, Avoidant Abuse, implies and suggests is that this cluster of people who engage in avoidant abuse, in this case haunting, are actually psychologically trying to destroy you. Like if they're with someone who is particularly kind, conscientious, if they're with someone who was never causing any problems for them, because they have so much shame over how terrible they believe they actually are, they may try to psychologically destroy you to get a rise out of you, to make them feel better about themselves. And what happens over time is that you're undergoing emotional battering. Unlike a physical battering from domestic violence that we would normally see in the overt experiences, you're going through emotional battering. You are being worn down over time. And worse is that your inclination then to go into a bit of a fawn response, which could happen just spontaneously, even if you're a pretty secure person, is you try and be kind, you try and be nice, you try and be reasonable and communicate really well. You watch all the podcasts and read all the books on how to communicate with an avoidant attacher. And that would all probably be helpful if you were engaging with an avoidant who is reasonable, but you're engaging with a severe avoidant attacher who's not open to communication. These individuals have a distorted sense of reality. They're not looking to try and get compromise. They're not looking to understand you. They're looking to control you because they're trying to manage the intimacy and how they feel throughout this entire thing. So, in essence, as you're going through this, as you're trying to fawn and be gentle and be nice and not set them off, you are ending up in a position where they actually lose a lot of respect for you, and some of them might actually get a bit of an ego boost out of how they're wearing you down. Does it mean they have a personality disorder? Possibly. Those two things can go hand in hand. And some severe avoidant attachers will actually realize later in life, this behavior is not okay and I need to stop. But those that are on like the extreme end of the spectrum do engage in this kind of maddening behavior. And as this book, Avoidant Abuse, describes, they say it's very easy. And look, I've done this, so you can take what I'm about to say with a pinch of salt. I've often said a lot of this boils down to emotional immaturity, which to a degree is true. However, this book goes on to say that there's actually malicious intent for some of these people. They're actually trying to, really wear you down because of their own toxic shame. And we need to be careful, as per this book, for actually talking about whether or not they're actually just simply being immature or there's actually some malicious intent here. Now, for a bit of a personal thought on this, I was hesitant for a very long time to say there was any malicious intent behind these people, as I think a lot of you probably know, because much of the time it seems like it's quite unconscious and they just don't know what they're doing. But having obviously read out many letters, been with many clients, heard many stories, a lot of these individuals definitely are in a spectrum where they can have malicious intent. So it is one of those things where I'd say you've got to be very mindful of the fact that even though much of them I don't believe have like Machiavellian intent or are actually malevolent, this book is starting to give me reason to believe that it's a possibility that this group, this extreme cluster of, people with a very severe avoidant attachment style could potentially actually get off on being quite abusive from time to time. Not all of them, some of them. So that's the thing. And this is also one of the challenges of, being in this space is that, I could easily flip this for the anxious attachers as well too. I've seen so many different kinds of anxious attachers. Those that are lovely, maybe fawn a little bit too much, generally very pleasant to be around. But then I've also interacted with anxious attachers who are on the severe end, who are big into controlling behavior. They have to dominate you and overwhelm you. They have to constantly, suppress any individuality you have, because they really are looking to control any threat of abandonment. They're paranoid about anything you do because they're worried that you're potentially going to leave them at any turn. So you've really got to be very mindful of the fact that some of these individuals can engage in quite bad, very domestic violence sort of behavior. But where I think it's tricky in the situation of avoidant attachment is that this behavior almost gets a bit of a pass by a lot of folks and individuals who aren't familiar with it, because covert abuse, not covert narcissism, covert abuse is not something that we would normally categorize and describe, because it's not the sort of stuff we would normally expect to see in domestic violence cases, even though it would still, I think, be actually domestic violence, because when you're in a trauma bond, you are now in an abusive dynamic. So that's why I think that there's a lot of reason, I think, to actually talk more about how avoidant abuse as a term is actually very applicable for this category of people. And it's just at times a bit tricky to remind everyone that whilst avoidant attachers on one hand of the one side are reasonable, there's another group of people that actually they really need a lot of help. So that's why, as we just take a step back, I just want to state it is very important to mention once again that not every avoidant attacher will display these kinds of behaviors, but those that do, like those that are exhibiting ghosting alongside haunting, really are trying to take over your agency, your voice, because they don't want you to just have a say in what's going on. They're used to being controlled when they were kids, and so they want to take that away from you. People who have a lot of toxic shame about who they are and how they feel about themselves really don't feel good being in intimate relationships, whether that be with friends, family, or lovers. So that's why you've just got to understand that for those that are avoidantly attached, those who are like really insecure about themselves, have those classic signs of saying, I'm not a good person, etc. It's a really, 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 glaring red flag of like, you've got to be careful with this group of people, because they can also wear you down and eat you alive if you're not aware of it. And I think that it's good that, this book, Avoidant Abuse, is actually available for people to read about, because in my opinion, it's not the same as narcissistic abuse, but it's definitely close. I'd say it's adjacent, but it comes with its own unique, I'd say, patterns that are not always the same as what we would expect in purely narcissistic relationships, which I think can be a much bigger umbrella term, because as we know, people with personality disorders will always have an insecure attachment. It's not always going to be avoidant though. So that's that. All right, I'm going to transition to Q und A and do a little bit of Q&A with everyone. So feel free to throw your questions in the question mark box. And if I've missed any questions that are in the chat, I might go to them a bit later and read them out. So let's go from here. Oh, by the way, just to let you know, the book, Avoidant Abuse, tricky find. Like, I really had to do some digging around to get it. And it's a weird format because it's an ebook. If you're like me and you have a Kindle, get it emailed to your Kindle for the sake of making it easy to read. Otherwise, just print it out. But I will eventually do a live just talking about key aspects from this book and promoting it, because I actually think a lot of you would benefit from reading it. But one caveat that I want to say, just please be mindful of this, is, again, not every avoidant attacher will engage in avoidant abuse. There are some who will engage in avoidant abuse who then have the self-reflection to realize that they're doing something wrong and want to work on it. And there are those on the extreme end who will never change. So that's just something to be aware of. And Another thing to also think about too with this book, as well as, whilst this book I hope will give you some validity for what you've been through, it'll certainly make you angry and mad for what you've been through, which is good because it'll help your healing. Please also understand that that period of having validation and rage for what you've been through is a step in your healing journey. I'm going to be honest and say a lot of you, and I'm doing this for myself at the moment, need a lot of somatic therapy. You need to have a lot of healing to work off the back of this, because it's not just the avoidants who are hurting you. There's some stuff from your past that's probably caused a lot of this as well too. So please bear in mind that whilst this book will be a good agent for helping you in your recovery, there are other steps you must look into in the future as well too. But anyways, let's get to Q&A. All right, so my ex-situationship got a girlfriend after ghosting a second time. Flaunts her on social media. That's a statement, not a question. I'm assuming there's a question coming to that. Otherwise, I just want to say, if I had to make a comment on that, that's pretty rough. I'm sorry that you're going through that. To me, it sounds like he's promoting this new girlfriend while still engaging with you, which suggests to me that his way of creating control in this dynamic is through the new girlfriend. And it means that he can have his cake and eat it too. He can look like everything's fine. You're the needy one who needs all this reassurance and support. And it just goes into filling, it basically props his ego up and he doesn't have to take any accountability or responsibility. So it's pretty shitty. And it also means that, he can essentially get away with murder because he's not having proper closure with you, and he's not even having a proper relationship with a new girlfriend. You can't have a committed relationship with someone where you still have a connection to an ex, which is reasonably significant. So no, not okay behavior. Hey Ken, is it true that a dismissive avoidant ex who knows you posted on stories on... let me start this again. Is it true that a dismissive avoidant ex who knows you posted on stories on social media but ignores it, loves you more than the one who actually sees your stuff? I'm curious how the whole theory works. Is it true that a dismissive avoidant ex who knows you posted on stories on social media but ignores it? So he's saying... sorry, my brain's really struggling to read this. As in... If an avoidant attacher ignores your posts on social media, they like you more than if they engage with your posts? Is that what you're saying? Because my answer would be, I don't think there's much of an indicator for one or the other, in the sense that I'm like, to me, it doesn't really... For me, when I hear that, I'm like, I think in my experience with avoidant attachers, when they're like haunting your socials, right? When they're engaging with your socials, if they're like just looking at your stories but not engaging with your posts, it could indicate that they're maybe more scared to actually, engage properly, to show that they actually have some interest. Because you got to remember too, they still have interest in you at this stage. Why would they spending this amount of time and energy looking at your stuff? And the other thing too is, if they're not engaging with you for a period of time on social media, it might also be because they're trying to get away from any reminders of you for a period of time. No one just misclicks on an ex. Like, no one just, I stumbled with my finger and just ran across my ex who I was dating, who I broke up with. Like, no. Like, that's not how this works. So, a lot of this is done with intention. And I think that with regards to the manner in which whether they ignore your content or they look at your content, I really think depends on how they're feeling internally inside of them. But I would need more context for your individual situation to probably be like, this is what I think is happening, this is what I feel is happening. But it really depends, from case to case. Why has my fearful avoidant ex all of a sudden unblocked me after 12 weeks when he is in a rebound? Because that means he's got safety, right? He's got a rebound who he's able to be with, but whenever that rebound gets too close, he'll go to you. You are the backup option. You give him a sense of safety to now actually look back at you fondly. You will be the phantom ex that he, fascinates over while he's with the next person. You are in a position now where even if he blocked you because he was mad at you and he was upset with feeling like a shit person off the back of the breakup, now he may not be feeling that way and be actually missing you a bit and want to still have you around in the backdrop. But it's so much easier now to talk to you because he's got a rebound. And it might sound strange, right? Like, why would you unblock an ex when you're in a new relationship? Well, for someone who's a severe avoidant attacher, remember, they're not going to, if they're going to be with someone new, they like to still also have their options open and also feel like they're getting validation from past exes as well too, in order to feel important and needed. So in that context, that's probably why they've unblocked you in that particular moment. I find that those that are fearful avoidants, particularly those that are quite severe in their fearful avoidant attachment style, do very erratic things to control the dynamic, oscillating between missing you terribly and wanting to push you away, and it can be incredibly manipulative at times. How does the avoidant heal the internal shame? Great question. So, shame is a awful emotion to feel. From a biological perspective, it was probably, we theorize that it was probably helpful for us to know when we've screwed up and we're potentially about to be outed of a community or a tribe. But with toxic shame, it tells a different narrative. Instead of saying, I've done a bad thing, it says, I am a bad person. And toxic shame is also the basis for people who have narcissistic personality disorder, and we all know how well they behave. And toxic shame basically is something where you feel like you are unworthy, you are a shit stain, and you are not lovable, you are defective. And so in terms of how to go about healing it, it's a very tricky thing. I've actually had a few clients with some pretty bad toxic shame, and they've had to, the work with them has taken much longer than the average client, because anytime you try to challenge their concept of self-worth, their inner critic, which is on steroids, is always there to jump in and remind everyone how awful they are as a human being. And I've actually had a few avoidant clients who've come off the back of an avoidant breakup, where they're even telling me, but I was toxic in my relationship, that's why they broke up with me. And they keep going through this mantra of trying to convince you, the therapist, that they're bad. I'm a bad person. I deserve this. I'm not good enough. Healing this might be something where you actually need to look into some adjacent modalities. I've got some mates who have struggled with toxic shame, where they've done ayahuasca retreats. They've had to do a lot of 12-step recovery programs to heal through a lot of that too. They've had to go and do a lot of somatic therapy, so emotional therapy, internal family systems therapy, because talk therapy is never going to fix that. The talk therapy piece is good for the rapport building, but oh man, you've almost got to try and find a bunch of ways to try and tap into that, because when that toxic shame is running the show, game over. It will ruin your relationships, it will ruin your job life, it will ruin your life satisfaction, and it will just it'll make you not only feel unlovable, but it will also make people resent you for how you treat them. And it's not an easy thing to heal from. And it's why a lot of people with, toxic shame don't heal, is because of how hard it is to actually overcome. There was a resource I read a while ago that describes how I think African villages back in the day would often gather around when someone had done an action like, say, an assault or had stolen, and they recognized that the person had probably done that out of some place of toxic shame. And what they would do is they would gather around, place the individuals who'd done these terrible actions and crimes, and basically remind these individuals, as a community, we love you. We're here to support you. But you continuing to be this way is basically going against the sanctity and boundaries of this community. And there is research which suggests that such intense community-based approaches might actually have a benefit for those that commit behavior out of toxic shame, because it actually forces them to realize they've now got to change, otherwise they're getting kicked out. So that, and not that I'd want any of you who might be struggling with toxic shame to go through a trial by fire through, public inquisition. But, that is one thing that's been apparently somewhat successful from what I've heard. But then we also know that those that have a narcissistic personality disorder don't ever change. So, in short, it's a tricky thing. All right, let's keep going. I find it magical how after months of not posting anything, I randomly post a story and he disappears from WhatsApp for hours. Dude is on that thing 24/7. So that would suggest to me that he gets triggered, and it suggests to me that reminders of you upset him and he has a bit of a panic. I know that sometimes people often will tell you, oh, it doesn't mean anything when they're online. Don't try and make meaning out of people's actions through social media. I have the opposite opinion. I'm like, no, you can absolutely see what's going on for someone through their social media behavior. It's not a case of being delusional. It's not a case of you being, wanting to see what you want to see. It's the fact that, a lot of these individuals behave in very emotionally impulsive ways online, and you can just see what's going on from a mile away and be like, that's whack. In any case, I can see someone here has asked, are we all rebounds? No, not necessarily. Some people will be rebounds, but I think there's context for a rebound, in that a rebound to me would be where an avoidance still has an ex or a phantom ex like lurking in the backdrop, and they haven't processed their feelings off the back of an ex immediately, and then they just, they're looking for you as a way to try and mitigate and to move forward off the back of a bad breakup that they've created. So in that case, you might be a rebound. But please bear in mind that even if you are a rebound, it doesn't mean that they never cared about you, or that they've just, it might feel like they've used you, which you can have that feeling, that's for sure. But it doesn't mean that they never got into you. And it's important to understand too that just because these individuals might have used you for a period of time to feel better about themselves, you can still have degrees of intimacy with them before they shut down and do the same to you that they did to their previous partner. So please don't let the label of a rebound invalidate what you both experienced together, because sometimes I think we get so caught up in what we were that we can often take it really harshly and make us feel like we're shit, we're not good enough, when it's just the fact that, no, you were in a dynamic with someone who's so dysregulated, so cacked up with trauma, and doesn't know how to relate without being manipulative and controlling. So that's why I say, just be mindful of when you're worrying about whether you're a rebound, because at the end of the day, it really might be more of a call to action to have stronger boundaries going forward, be more educated on this. And outside of that, it doesn't really mean much more than that. Let's keep going. Why is my avoidant ex posting stories with the rebound girlfriend and doing everything he didn't do with me with her? I'm heartbroken. This is a question that I've answered a few times in the past, and it's one that I'm always happy to reply to. Not that I take joy in your suffering. It's an awful thing to go through that. I know what it's like to feel like you're watching deja vu play out with your ex as they're doing all the things they said they would do with you with the new partner. So you got to remember that they've taken all of that emotional baggage from you, which they haven't dealt with, and they're now dumping that onto the next relationship, right? And usually avoidant attachers date down. And so when they date someone who doesn't have a particularly good self-esteem, and they're not also maybe as attached to them, it's very easy for them to just do all the things that they were going to do with you with this person. They can explore their feelings. They can have their cake and eat it too by doing the vacation they said they'd do with you. They're getting into a relationship. They're having kids. They're doing all this stuff with the new person, and they're not being challenged on it. When they're with someone like you might be someone who actually might have had a degree of boundaries. You might be someone with a healthier self-esteem than they certainly have. And they might have been really intimidated with you, but compared to this new person who may not challenge them as much, it may be something where they feel quite easy to just take all of those plans and efforts and ideas they wanted to share with you with the new person. And you got to remember too, this goes back to the whole thing of, future faking. Even though these individuals may never actually deliver upon the promises and the goals they have for you in a relationship, they're still enthusiastic about these goals. You can't fake that genuine enthusiasm. And I think they're genuinely like little children who are like, oh my God, I really want to do this with you. We could have like the most amazing time ever. And I think that for a lot of them, it really is all about those dopamine hits, the thrill of having kids, the thrill of the holiday, but not the actual reality of spending time together, raising a child, looking after a person when they're going through emotional moments. That's stuff that they've got a complete anathema to. So that's usually what can happen. And it is done, with, I probably imagine there's probably some unconscious stuff going on, maybe a bit of conscious stuff going on. It doesn't really matter. The point is they've basically just taken your, the stuff that we're going to do with you, plonked it into a safer relationship, and they're doing it, but it does not mean that they're necessarily connected to that person. The only thing they could be connected to is just how much escapism they're getting. Because just remember this, and this is a key thing to remember, avoidant attachers. What's their number one love? It ain't you. It ain't their new person. It's not their exes. It's escapism. Many of these people are addicts for escapism, whether it be alcohol, drugs, new partners. This is how they get their fix, to feel better about themselves and to not have to worry about what's going on inside of them and the things they've done to other people as well too. All right, next question. Can they seek comfort from chatting on dating apps post-breakup? Yes, they absolutely can. It goes back to what I just said in that last answer of mine, which is this is their way of helping them boost their self-esteem off the back of this. And many avoidant attachers, when they're feeling particularly shitty about themselves, do want a lot of external validation to make them feel better. You might be a partner who's confronted them about how they seem to be, under-communicating when they're going through a cold cycle. You might also be upset with the fact that they always seem to be on their phone chatting with, say, for example, if you're a woman with a guy, you're calling your partner out for the way in which he seems to be chatting to women online through social media. It feels disrespectful. So what do? They might punish you. They'll probably go off, to the bathroom where they start sexting all these women to get external validation because you've made them feel shit now. Their sensitivity to criticism is extreme. And so now they're punishing you and also trying to make them feel better and trying to get control over the situation. So when they break up with you, maybe this is, not maybe, definitely, this is one of their ways of trying to prop themselves back up, to feel needed, to feel important, because that helps them feel better whilst their self-esteem is absolute rock bottom. I can see here someone says, speaking of dopamine, I've been hearing a lot about vasopressin and how it's really important for males. What are your thoughts about this, Ken? Great question. Truthfully, I don't really know much. Oh, I don't know what I did there. I think there we go. Truthfully, I don't really know much about hormones in the context of like vasopressin, dopamine, oxytocin, in terms of like what they all do for people too. I'm sure there's people here who are probably better experts than me on that too. And I have no knowledge on like what, like outside of testosterone for men, obviously, how they play a role for men, women, non-binary people. So I'm going to say I don't know. It's something that I'm interested in learning. And also just be careful too, because I've seen some content creators try and, hammer the hormonal piece a lot, as if to say, it's the fault of the hormones for some of these individuals. And I'm here to say no. Our hormones, in my experience, have not been the driver for such shitty behavior. A lot of this, if I'm being reductive, is trauma and emotional stuff and personality. So bear in mind that hormones definitely are a part of the puzzle we're dealing with, but they'll never be the core pieces of the overall puzzle. Let's see, what else have we got here? I have discovered that my fearful avoidant is talking to a lot of different women, and I mean a lot, and sexting them. Oh, this sounds like what I just said. I'm in disbelief. Do they feel guilty when they cheat? This was right off the back of us finally becoming exclusive. I think there's a combination of things that go on. So, on one hand, I think that they have... I think they definitely do feel shame and guilt for their behavior, and they often try and shut that down. And I also think too, when they're particularly fragile, meaning they've got a very shaky ego, they'll probably make it out to be that you're the reason for why they're doing this. And internally, them cheating on you is a bit of a fuck you to you, because maybe they felt controlled by you. Maybe they felt like you were trying to take away their freedom, that they were feeling enmeshed by you. It's not rational behavior, right? Like, a lot of this might be done because they're trying to get back at you. But also, if it's not that malicious, it could also just be their way of seeking out escapism from the relationship too, right? Like, they could also be doing it because the pressure of being in that relationship for them was getting to boiling point, and I'm not excusing the behavior. And they were getting to a point where they felt like they had to cheat because that was their only relief from what was going on internally with what was playing out between the two of you. So it's important to understand that, you know, the intentions might be different from one avoidant to the next, but it goes back to that theme of it's escapism, right? They're looking to obviously get away from the intense feelings they have between you and them. And I think that in terms of, you know, do they feel guilty and shame? I'm confident they do, but I think a lot of them try and suppress a lot of that, because anytime they feel that, that's what motivates them to keep, you know, obviously compartmentalizing, looking for external validation to feel better about themselves. That's my interpretation of this. It's a good question though. It's Halloween. How do you become a Phantom X? Thanks in advance. Great question. Well, I don't think you really do anything to qualify. Like, I mean, I don't think that you submit a resume, go for a job interview, and win the role for the Phantom X. But I do think there are some factors that are maybe more likely to make you a Phantom X whom they might return to. They might have more of a Phantom X syndrome for you if there was a lot of... If, for instance, there was a lot of drama in the relationship between the two of you, and there was a lot of chaos, and also one thing to also think about too, this is particularly true for a lot of severe avoidants, some of them will try and start fights. It'll be subtle. They'll have like little digs at you, like the flaw finding that comes out, like when they start degrading you every now and then because they're shutting down. That might be their way of baiting conflict as well too. And I think that for a lot of them, they may, like, part of the reason why they also drone on about their toxic exes is because even though they may not have particularly liked those people, there was drama in that. And drama equals intensity. And for a lot of these people, it does one of two things. It makes them feel needed because they have someone they can go back to who's chaos. And it's also something they're familiar with because they don't have to be a bad person. When they've got this needy, horrible ex who's chaotic in the background, well, I look like such a saint for taking care of this person because they couldn't take care of themselves. So I do think, if I'm being completely honest, that whilst we all stand a chance to be a Phantom X, I think the Phantom X allure is likely to be stronger depending on who their available people are in their head that they can reach back out to with a degree of ease, where they feel like they can also push boundaries easily, where they feel as though they can have their cake and eat it too, and also I think on how they're feeling in themselves. Like, you know, I know Dr. Sarah Hensley isn't the only person to talk about this. She talks about how some avoidants are more likely to come back round after a month, 6 months, a year, depending on the context of what you guys went through. I have a different take, which is I think it really depends on how they're feeling about themselves, which is probably one of the universal truths of these dynamics is like the way they behave in these dynamics is pretty much how they're feeling in the moment. So if you respect the fact that a lot of these individuals are very emotionally dysregulated and prone to, very lopsided emotions where one minute they can love you and the next minute they can hate you, you got to understand that you're not playing with a rational human being. You're playing with someone who feels immense shame one minute, euphoria the next to overcome it, and they can have intense feelings of longing and missing you. And the thing you got to really understand too is, this is something I really hope people can learn from this page because it's important, is I find that when avoidant attachers are chasing an ex, they're very much usually coming from a place of distress and euphoria. And it's often hard to pick that up, especially if you are a battered and slightly curious ex who's maybe curious about getting back with your avoidant attacher or wanting to find out what's going on. Meaning that, let's paint a picture. Imagine, I'm going to use an LGBTQI plus example. Let's imagine Louise was the avoidant and her partner Jill, has got, plenty of questions, isn't sure what happened, and is really still hurt off the back of this. And Louise comes back around and is saying to Jill, I really miss you. I really, I'm so sorry for what I did. I can't live my life without you. You were literally the only thing that ever made me happy. I'm so unhappy without you. And I'm sure many of you who are listening have probably had an experience like this, right? On one hand, that's going to feel incredibly validating. It's going to make you feel like, oh, finally, this person sees my worth. I made this person happy. Oh my God, that's great, right? I've got to be honest and say, if you feel that way, there is a high chance that you've also suffered emotional neglect somewhere in your past and you are very vulnerable to this kind of lovemaking, which is not healthy. Because what's actually going on for Louise here is that whilst she's genuine in probably saying this, she's being over the top. She's being extreme. No one should be that responsible for managing her own feelings of depression. In this instance, Louise is probably very depressed in the moment and she's looking out for anyone and anything to make her feel better because she doesn't know how to work on her own internal stuff. So what she's doing is being very emotionally intense, where she's basically operating out of a place of extreme dysregulation. When we're operating out of dysregulation, the emotional brain takes over the prefrontal cortex and we can be full on. We are like a child who is basically banging at our door, trying to get their needs met. And it can be very hard for a lot of you on the receiving end to assert boundaries and to tell this person to kindly go back the other way, because you might feel guilty and you might feel shameful. When these individuals start connecting how their mental health is also connected to the relationship and how you were the spark of joy that they'd never had previously, it's very easy to think that you are responsible for this person somehow, which you're not in this context. In this context, this person is emotionally dumping on you, is emotionally hammering you with big enthusiasm, big, energy. And in this case for Jill, she's probably very vulnerable to this and might fold like a beachside deck chair and try and get Louise back in before round 2 starts and ends probably very quickly. So please understand that in this particular case, I've seen this play out more times than I care to count. The avoidant attacher will probably just say just about anything to, try and, talk you into getting them back. And ironically, they're probably better at actually staying in that talking position. And they can do this for years. Like I've had clients who've been in the on and off cycle of just talking with an avoidant who's desperate to come back for sometimes 14 years. And what will happen is the avoidant will be making all these promises of being like, it'll be different from last time. I'll go to therapy. We'll work on this. Don't worry. I'm not going to let what happened last time happen to me again. It's all going to be fine. And they may genuinely believe themselves. Like they really do believe in that moment that's not going to happen again. You're the love of their life. They really genuinely mean it. But this is where I have to give everyone permission to put your big boy, girl, people boots on and pants and say, they don't know better. You know better. If you've got an avoidant coming back to you, trying to go back for round 2, where they're desperate, being like, we can make this work. I'm not going to shut down again. I can make this work. They're not. They don't have control of their emotions. When their fear kicks in and they shut down again, they're not going to fight for the relationship. No amount of planning, no amount of talking about therapy, no amount of we'll communicate through this will fix a dysregulated nervous system when they feel compelled to run. In fact, if any of you have gone through this experience, please feel free, if you feel called to it, out of discretion to your privacy, to just share your experiences of what it's been like when an avoidant attacher has been, promising and claiming that they'll change and work on things. Because I guarantee you, it's probably very consistent with my experience too, which is they shut down and leave again, and it feels even worse this time because you thought things might be better when in fact it isn't. I know many people have done the boomerang avoidance cycle and it's been absolutely hell, and it just wears you down over time and makes you a victim of emotional battering. So you got to be very, very careful of when this happens. All right, next question. You guys ask such great questions as always, and I really do appreciate what you share. This looks like it connects with what I just said. Spoke in depth with avoidant about getting back together, but with set boundaries and therapy. They agreed with everything and said that they would seriously consider no contact for 3 weeks, advice on how long it could take them to get back to me. So I'm assuming you've gone no contact for 3 weeks whilst also discussing everything. Oh, sorry, no, now I understand. So they've gone no contact from you after that conversation for 3 weeks. Advice on how long it could take them to get back to you, no idea. Like, honestly, I go back to what I've said. They do, they're operating from an emotional brain, right? So please bear in mind that, it's all based on how they're feeling. It's all based on what their mood is in that moment. You could have had such an endearing conversation about how you're going to work on it, and then as soon as you hung up the phone, finished chatting online, stopped talking with each other on it, at a cafe or after a walk, they had a freak out moment. Many anxious attachers, when they don't hear from someone, worry about when the next text is coming in. The avoidants catastrophize in a completely different direction. They're worried about where this is all going. They worry that they're going to lose their independence, their future. They worry that if you get close, you won't like them and you'll reject them. And so that's when they start taking your agency and control out of it. And in this case, it looks like this person who was so on board with planning, therapy, boundaries, and how to make it work, that was it. That was all it was, that's what he, I'm assuming it's a she, this person feels comfortable with, just chatting about it. This is their optimal feeling of safety. They want to be at a distance from you. They want to pine after you. They want to fantasize about what it's like to get back with you. They have no capacity to commit and stick with you. Even if they have a lot of fondness for you, the minute, you try and force each other back, maybe force is the wrong word, you try and discuss and try and integrate each other back together again, the fear inside of them will take over and all your well laid out plans will go to the bin. They're not going to come to the table. I think I saw someone say something to the effect of, how can they have so much self-awareness and still behave this way? Because self-awareness will never be enough to overcome one's trauma. I really do think that self-awareness is like 10% of healing work. We can research all of this stuff online, understand how we behave, have cognitive comprehension for trauma and its implications. And fearful avoidants, to their credit, are very good typically at doing their psychoeducation. However, just because you know something doesn't mean you've integrated it. And there is a very big difference between someone who has great understanding of psychoeducation and another who actually doesn't feel those same feelings taking over their limbic system, their prefrontal cortex. When these individuals get emotionally hijacked, all their well-planned education goes out the window because they don't know how to regulate. They don't know how to face their demons, which are still running the show. So that's why you've got to understand, please bear in mind, just because someone yammers on about how much they know about trauma and therapy does not mean they've actually done any significant work on themselves. I know it's hard in this day and age to know who has and who hasn't worked on their stuff. It's my hope that for a lot of you who are, obviously watching my content, and as you get educated by also going through dating, you'll become better at discerning the difference. I can't really always give you clarity on the difference between someone who has versus someone who hasn't. But one key indicator that I think is really important to bear in mind is, how does this person handle emotional dysregulation? Do they own their 4 Fs, the fight, flight, freeze, fawn response? Or do they just let their emotional stuff control what's going on without taking any accountability and responsibility for it? Because usually I find those that haven't quite got a degree of, let's say, I don't want to say self-control, but let's just say, if someone's not really able to work through their own stuff coming up and take accountability for it, chances are it's all talk. And that's about it. All right, let's keep going with the questions. Is it a pattern of an avoidant to say yes in the last second rather than say no? To ask for a date in the last second to say no, to show very much, sorry, this question's, I'm not really sure if I'm reading this question correctly. So they show much interest and then disappear completely. Oh, okay, I think I understand what this question's asking. So is it typical for an avoidant to say at the last minute they're interested in doing something with you rather than saying no, but then disappear rather than show up when they've seemingly said yes? And my answer is that can be, and it's a great example of people pleasing. So, and it also illustrates the dysregulation of this too, right? Because if they're agreeing to something last minute, it sounds to me like they were stewing on that for quite a while. They were not happy for quite a while internally about whether or not they wanted to do this thing. And it seems like at one point, rather than just giving you a straight up, yep, that's fine, or being like, no, look, I can't, for a number of reasons, let's reschedule, they were battling about this decision. And then at the last minute, they just couldn't make it. This is a great example of people pleasing. A lot of these individuals, again, want to maintain an image that they're a good person, that there's nothing wrong with them. But the thing is that when it comes to agreeing to dates, showing up and wanting to hang out, they succumb to their fears and acquiesce. And a lot of these individuals will rather give you a yes to invitations and things and not show up because they don't want to handle conflict. They really do not believe they have the strength and the courage in their own boundaries to be able to stand up for themselves and have a hard no. Worse, they'll take away that choice from you, and they worry that you're going to change their mind, as if change of mind is always a bad thing. So yes, that can be very much a thing for a lot of avoidant attachers. And let's see, what else have we got here? I can see there's a few questions piling up in the chat, which I might get to. How about a fearful avoidant partner accusing you for cheating whilst he is the one riding with other people? Oh yeah, that's a thing. That's a wonderful example of projection. So a lot of avoidant attachers, who are in the severe end, particularly fearful avoidance, because I find they're the ones that are more likely to do this, have a nasty, nasty habit of not wanting to own their own side of the street. So they may call you crazy, they may call you insane, they may say you're the one who cheated on them, they may even say you were hot and cold with me, you were unable to communicate with me, when we know they're the ones who are more commonly under-communicating, under-initiating, withholding critical information. So in that respect, it's very, very normal for them to be very hypercritical of you when they don't want to face their reality. I want to take a moment here to just explain this to you. So, a lot of severe avoidant attachers, as I mentioned in this live already, live in a little fantasy land. You know, they have a very distorted reality. They're not the problem. Their partners are the problem. They're not needy. Who has needs? Why would you want that? If I'm in a relationship, people should just know what I like straight away, like that. You know, if you have to communicate your needs, that's just not sexy. You know, these individuals have really distorted beliefs about reality. They can't handle truth. And when you try to present truth to them and it hits that shame inside of them, that's when their rationalizing kicks in and tries to get rid of you because you are a threat. You threaten the construct they have inside of themselves to avoid accountability and responsibility. So that's why, in this context, it's really important to understand that for these people on the severe end, they're not going to be open to truth and reality because it's something that they're just not capable of really sitting with. All right, I might have to go grab my laundry in a minute, but while I've still got some time, I'm going to answer a few more questions in the chat. So someone asked, is it normal that they're still confused 9 months post-breakup, meaning that they're still uncertain about you? 100%. Because again, their feelings flip-flop depending on what's going on for them one day to the other. Do you know, emotional dysregulation's a bitch. Like maybe some of you can relate. Like, you know, I remember back in the day when I was really dysregulated, you know, some days I'd just wake up moody and irritable and I'd be like that for like 48 hours. And then other days I'd be like, oh, I'm fine. But then I'd be triggered easily and my day would be ruined. You know, emotional dysregulation really messes with our capacity for relationships, for our capacity to show up and actually just be at peace. I gotta tell you, ever since I've, you know, cleaned up some of my stuff, I feel like, why was I not like this since day one? But, you know, that's the annoying thing about having a dysregulated nervous system, is that that becomes your normal and you don't know how to deal with a lot of the internal stuff going on too. So, long story short, yes. Oh, I can see someone here said, I had a chat with Megan. She was too cute and really engaged into my story. I'm going to book a session. Well, that's fantastic. So glad to hear that you had a great time with my teammate Megan. And on this note, if anyone here is open for a session and wants to work through their stuff, highly recommend you book in to work with my team. I know my teammate Catherine at the moment has got some availability and is keen to take on some clients, and she's really, really good too. So if you want to speak to anyone, please feel free to check out Megan and Catherine, who are new to the team. Amy and Kate are still taking on clients as well too, but they're pretty comfy with what they've got on right now as well in terms of client load. All right, I got another person here saying, they say they adore you and still cheat on you. His love confessions have been intense to say the least. I bet they have. He cried and begged, then went on to cheat at the slightest problem. Yep. Emotional dysregulation and a whole bunch of other things going on there too. So in that case, you know, can you just see how like this person has gone from being like, you're my everything, to then basically going, fuck you, I'm going to cheat on you. Like, and even if they maybe don't have like that vicious intent, you know, it seems like anytime this particular person gets really close to you, he can't handle it. He freaks out. His response to being that intimate with someone is to immediately get with someone else to feel better. He cannot handle that much closeness and intensity with someone in a romantic relationship that he has to cheat. This one sounds like a very severe fearful avoidant. I wouldn't imagine a dismissive would probably behave quite like that, but that definitely sounds to me like he is someone where anytime, you know, there's a problem, he internalizes it and he has to feel better by being with someone straight away. I'm sorry you've gone through this because that's awful, awful behavior, but this is his coping mechanism from shame, from truth, and a whole bunch of things. Someone here has written, what about saying we had an intense relationship but not wanting to work on it, instead jumping into dating after getting intimate with me? Because that intensity was likely the catalyst for him wanting to opt out. he's not going to want to work on this, because for him to want to work on that relationship would mean he'd have to confront his fear of intimacy, and he's not going to do that. Behind all that fear is probably big shame about who he is as a human being. And what his answer probably should have been was, if we continue dating, I think you're going to think I'm a terrible human being. You're going to see how shit I am. You're not going to love me. And I worry that you're going to leave me because you won't like who I am. You'll think I'm boring. So that's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. They basically create their own crap, which is terrible. The freak out is a real thing. My next blew up the bridge in a cowardly dump text, then became petty soon after. It's amazing what an a-hole they are. Yeah, that's very common for a lot of them from time to time. How to truly walk through the loss of a fearful avoidant who genuinely feels like the love of your life. There's only so much focusing on yourself that one can do when we're the relational species that we are. True. That is very true. And the whole working on oneself or focusing on oneself, I think, can be very vague for a lot of people, because they're like, what the fuck does that mean? And, the advice that I would normally give to people would be, double down on work, get healthy, exercise. They're all functional things, right? That actually isn't what you need right now. Anytime I hear a client tell me that, my brain goes, you have some emotional stuff that you need to work on. And where does that begin? Well, you just said it right there. I still feel like this is the love of my life. Now, if I was your counselor, which I'm obviously not under this context, my brain would be like, okay, why do you feel like they were the love of your life? Let's go there. How does that feel? Where do you feel that in your body? What memories does that bring up for you? Do you feel like you've just lost, someone important to you? I know a lot of my male clients, some, women I work with feel this way, but a lot of my male clients take the loss of a fearful avoidant ex tremendously. They feel like they're a failure. They feel like they've lost something, where they are probably very type A people who've had to work really hard at school, at a whole bunch of things. This genuinely feels like they're never going to meet someone else like that again. And I think a lot of that scarcity mindset has probably come from, experiences growing up where they were made to feel like, this is it. If you fail, that's it for you. And particularly for men, as we get older and we hit our 30s and 40s, we often feel like our life hasn't hit the milestones that we want for us. Women will feel this way too, like it can happen for women as well. But there is this real feeling of like beholding ourselves to a certain timeline, where if we've dated someone who was amazing on paper, really intense, and it felt like our everything, the danger is that we often, I think we've lost our opportunity to have the life that we wanted to create. If you're a woman, maybe you wanted kids. If you're a guy, maybe you thought you were going to be settled by this particular point in time. And now you're nearing 40 and you're feeling like, all your opportunities have failed and you feel like a failure, and there's some shame there, right? So look, I'm just speculating, but having worked with a lot of clients on stuff like this, also done it for me, it's very common for the hang up now to be, you've got some emotional stuff that you now need to work on. And it's not just improving your life in other areas that are more functional. Let's see, what else have we got here? They keep going to therapy, but not enough time in between fuck-ups. So you keep getting hurt and damaged, traumatized for life, probably. Yep, and you got to remember too, we don't know what they're working on in therapy. Meaning that when an avoidant attacher goes to therapy, you got to remember they've got to build a relationship up with the therapist. We don't know what the quality of the therapist is. We don't know what the quality of the actual content of what they're working on is. It could be years. Like, according to my colleagues who work with avoidant attachers, in their day jobs, they've said to me, sometimes they will finally click on to things I've been telling them years after they've been doing all this behavior. So, it's, again, not in our time. It's very much on their time. All right, 2 more questions. Let's see. He blocked me and then started dating immediately afterwards, being emotionally confused 9 months post-breakup. Yep, that's very consistent. Thank you for the shout out, Cody. I appreciate that. All right, 1 more. Ken, what is the likelihood of a severe FA in their 40s healing to secure? I'm connected one, but it doesn't seem like the future relationship can be sustainable. Great question. I don't know your context, so I can't give you like a clear answer specifically for your case. But the fact that you're writing that suggests to me that you've got some serious concerns. And it sounds to me like the person you're seeing or was seeing has probably talked a lot about it, but isn't actually taking the steps to necessarily work towards it from what you're sharing with me. And so if that's the case, it does suggest to me that, if I'm being completely honest, this relationship that you're in is not going to be the catalyst that gets her in there. Why? Because she may not recognize that she has a problem, or she doesn't want to recognize that she has a problem. Many of these individuals, particularly fearful avoidant attachers I've worked with, they may blame you and or the relationship for why they're feeling the way that they're feeling, and conclude that that's not a reason for therapy. They may conclude, oh, it's you. I don't need to work on this, so I'm just out. So please bear in mind that when you're writing this to me, my brain is already going, I don't think there's a high chance for her wanting to work on this. And even if she does, it's not going to probably be very significant therapy. Hell, she could end the relationship with you. Go to her therapist. Tell her therapist what a terrible human being you were. You were so needy, obsessive. You're a stalker. All you wanted her to do was go to therapy. She can create a narrative that makes her feel more at ease with what's going on, so she doesn't have to confront her own accountability and responsibility. Fortunately, a lot of therapists can actually be very quick to figure out what's going on. But all I will say is that, in short, low likelihood, in my opinion, without knowing the full circumstances of what you're going through. All right, everybody. Thank you very much for joining this Halloween experience. I see when someone here has asked me, what was the name of the book again? The book that I've been referring to throughout this live is called Avoidant Abuse. I'm going to do a live on it where I talk about it at length. There goes my alarm. I need to go do my laundry now. So I'm going to just say thank you to everyone for being here, and I will see you guys next time.